Welcome to Pax Europiana, the podcast about peace in Europe. And it's very dramatic times now because we have this imminent attack and this aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine and against all of us. And we must be united now. That's why I call for more unity between the NATO and EU allies with Ukraine. It's very important that we all work together at this stage and we repel the Russian aggression. It's already at the border. They have amassed a lot of troops. Yesterday, the press conference of the United States Defense Secretary and the Chief of Staff was really very dramatic moment in European history. I mean, they were very clear that they will be ready to defend Ukraine. They were very clear that they're very afraid of a major Russian invasion. And we have to be absolutely ready for that. And of course, it will be the main front will be Ukraine, the defense. They are prepared for that. Yeah? But we have to financially support Ukraine. This is the most important. Obviously, I'm also calling for a Stinger. That's this anti-air rockets, missiles the Americans have, and similar equipment. Spike, it's called in German. This is the German technology. I call for a Spike and a Stinger for every helicopter and every Russian airplane waiting for the Russians. That means we must supply the Russians, the Ukrainians. We must supply the Ukrainians for one Stinger for every helicopter, for one Spike for every airplane, for one Javelin, that's the anti-tank missile, for every tank. That will make the cost of the invasion very expensive for Russia. And we also have to make sure that the economic, fiscal, and currency system of Ukraine is stable. That means we, as the EU, as the central bank, as the Europeans, to guarantee the currency back at the present exchange rate, basically include Ukraine more or less nominally in the EMR2 immediately, and also to mutually guarantee the exchange rate. So there will be no currency crisis in the case of war, and the Ukrainians obviously indirectly are fiscally much more secure, and they can also then do more of the production of arms themselves, because that's actually much better, because then it fits their requirements. The people there, the soldiers are trained on that equipment, and they have a lot of industrial capacity in the defense sector. They can produce these things. And we just need to give them money and the security of the currency. That's the second thing, is not only the security of the currency, but not just 1.2 billion, but 12 billion of European money in this moment. This is the much better policy. And then obviously then institutionally, as I have now written, I think thousands of articles, to include Ukraine, that's of course medium-term things, like of course in the EU potential candidate status. Similar like Kosovo and like Bosnia. And this is the status Ukraine should have, and Moldova and Georgia. And also to include it in the Regional Cooperation Council in CEFTA. I made many videos about that one. And obviously also to include Ukraine in the European Union. And ultimately also in NATO. Of course, it would be better faster in NATO, but I guess now in this escalation of the crisis, this will not happen like I wanted. That's very sad. But if Russia attacks, you can be sure about it, that the Americans will be more and more involved in the defense of Ukraine, and ultimately the result will be NATO membership. So, isn't it much better to avoid the war? I'm very much in favor of avoiding the war, and we can do it by deterrence, by integration of Ukraine with the currency pact, by funding Ukraine more, because a stronger Ukraine and a stronger, more united Europe is then a better deterrent. Russia can then not attack. And then we can, of course, maybe even to make a compromise on NATO, I can imagine that. And but as a EU member, that is so important. I think it's the one thing the Austrians and Germans, when they have this immoral stance now and doing nothing basically, not supplying arms, bringing only minimal financial support, and trying to find a way. But nobody in Germany and Austria is ready seemingly to say the one thing which must be said. That's the EU membership of Ukraine as a temporary kind of compromise, and then the NATO membership comes later. I know it's not very popular nowhere, but a Cypriot scenario for Ukraine, that is, I think, a very serious alternative. Cyprus is obviously also complicated in the EU, but it's now 18 years, it has the euro. Why cannot Moldova and it's divided still, yeah, to this day? And why cannot Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine be exactly the same like Cyprus? It's of course I'm in favor of NATO membership, and I guarantee again, if the Russians really do a major escalation now, the Americans will defend Ukraine ultimately, and they will also then, with the basically war-torn Ukraine, which is the result of that after this Russian invasion, they will integrate it in NATO for sure. So it's Russia then creating, first of all, a major new war, and then a big crisis attached to it, and to strengthen American resolve to integrate Ukraine in NATO, because presently, we also have to be honest, it's not that they have so much appetite to secure a very difficult to define border between Ukraine and Russia with Article 5 guarantee. That was not the principal idea of most of the American strategists. Yeah? That was always a complicated and contested issue. And of course, now after the war, it's even more. So it's basically Russia aggression pushing Ukraine internally, because that was always not so clear. Now a lot of people are in favor of NATO in Ukraine, and most of them are in favor of the EU. But it was not the case before 2014, and it was a result of the aggression. So when we are a bit smarter, and we want peace, yeah, in Austria and Germany and in Central Europe, and then EU membership is a very good, not an alternative to NATO membership, but at least something we should discuss now. And it's very hard for me to understand that it's not on the table. Where's Annalena Baerbock, who was the star of the hope of the reforms, and everybody said she will be such a good foreign minister? Disappeared. Olaf Scholz disappeared. Lindner disappeared. The only visible person is now Merz, and he is actually pro-Ukrainian. He understands, of course, that these major strategic issues are an opening for him to topple Scholz, as Kohl has done it with Schmidt in '82. And I'm very much for that scenario, obviously. Anyhow, yeah, in Austria, we are anyhow a complete disappointment. I published now several texts, and I've written them and sent them around about how disappointed I am from Austria, and how bad our position is ultimately, and obviously still always this defense of these gas deals of the Nord Stream 2, that's all pretty bad and evil. And I hope that Austria will be the weak link to break the chain, to break the Nord Stream 2 consortium and basically officially abandon it. And I cannot understand that the Greens are not doing that. And Karl Nehammer is, I thought he will be better than Sebastian Kurz, but he's the same disappointment. We should really make sure that we have nothing to do with this Russian kind of treasonous, corrupt gas deals anymore. This is really very bad for Austrian politics. Yeah? There's a lot of political party funding from Russia going via the gas deals into mostly also the nationalists and some other parties, I'm sure, as well. And I'm not an investigative journalist, so I cannot claim these things here in the public. By the way, I was attacked by one Ukrainian pro-Russian journalist. He was attacking my interview because I was really upset about the Italians reporting so pro-Russian. And so he was attacking me. It was quite interesting experience to see all my social media posts and my interviews then criticized some of these famous YouTubers of the Russian side in Ukraine, because that exists as well, because there's obviously democracy, and I'm very much for press freedom. But what I'm against is a state-run public TVs bringing Russian propaganda unchecked and unbalanced. This is what I was criticizing, to be very clear here, and that's what I'm fully against. So, for this current crisis, I hope there will be no war. I hope there will be reason in the EU and in NATO that Ukraine should be member, but at least to have some progress concretely to integrate Ukraine and Georgia in the mechanisms of Southeastern Europe, to repeat the success of the Bulgarian currency pact, to further advance the EU integration agenda as these countries wanted. It is the EU accession trio, Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine, and they should get the EU potential candidate status as part of this crisis. I think we have clearly understood if they will join NATO is anyhow a decision ultimately the Americans will have to make, because we are all living under the nuclear umbrella of the Americans. But what we as Austria could do is that we join NATO as well, as I have now argued in the public here in Austria. And this is the contribution we can do, because Russia cannot make war for Austrian NATO accession or Swedish NATO accession, or not for Finland, and not for Ireland, Malta, Cyprus, not for Kosovo and Bosnia. And these 8 countries are via the EU membership or the Balkan peace agreements or station agreements for KFOR and SFOR, they are anyhow already all protected by the Americans and ultimately living under the American nuclear umbrella defense. So the 30 to 38 doesn't make a big difference, because no matter if now Ireland is nominally in NATO or not, it will not be a big defense contribution, nor Austria, and it is ultimately living already under the protection of the US Navy and under the protection of the US nuclear deterrent. In the wild case that something would really requiring that. But this is the reality of all EU countries. And this is, you cannot divide a nuclear umbrella is covering Austria, but Germany, but not Austria and Italy. We are talking about really big things. So ultimately, this is the situation. So the 8 new countries, Russia can really do nothing, because they are fully part of the West. We are nominally not in NATO, but in reality, they are already secured by the Americans. So that's my case. Obviously, that's more difficult for Ukraine. That is more difficult, as I've said already, for Georgia. Moldova doesn't even aspire. They are still a neutral country. So these issues are more complicated. There we have to be also very honest with our friends. It requires, first of all, the calming of that conflict. It requires a clarity which borders are to be protected, and it requires the constitutional, institutional, and political preparation on that one. Because you cannot bring Donbass and Crimea into NATO, obviously. There is no control of these territories, nor South Ossetia and Abkhazia, nor Transnistria, because NATO is based on free consent of the governed, and there must be the clarity what is to be defended. So these are open issues, and that's why actually Russia has made most of these aggressions in order to block that. But the EU is absolutely possible, and it's proven. It's Cyprus. Cyprus works. I was myself at the speech in the preparation of the Cypriot accession in 2002 it was, or 2003, when Genscher himself was speaking about these issues at some EPP summit. I think it was EPP. Yeah, I was at the EPP. It was Genscher himself. It was himself, he said it, that when somebody says something against Cypriot membership, then say that also the Western Germans were divided and were part of the EU, so it's absolutely possible. And now the president of Cyprus exists exactly for Ukraine and for Georgia and for Moldova. And we have also the 42 mutual guarantee clause, so Ukraine will be much safer. And in the fast track, what we actually can do very much is send more money. With more money, you can buy more arms. So simple it is. And you can stabilize the currency in a moment. It's a decision of the central bank of the EU, and they have done it. For example, the French are stabilizing the CFA in Africa for 14 countries. We can do that for Ukraine. So Ukraine has the fiscal space to buy more weapons. So that's my way to settle this, and we can then talk about the institutional issues later, once this crisis is over, because this immediate war crisis which we have now, this is really for February 2022, because once by April, when spring comes, the movement of the tanks is much more complicated, and everybody knows that. And so from April, we are much more secure. The Ukrainians and all friends of Ukraine are much more secure, and that's of course then the situation. But for now, I call for full support for Ukraine in terms of solidarity, as I do it with this video, in terms of financial support from the European taxpayers, in form of the currency link, and of course in a clear declaration of the European future of Ukraine as an EU member under the EU law, which I say since 2016, since I first came there. This is the way to do it. And this is what we should do as Austria, and nothing else. And of course, then, that is also important, cut all the Russian energy projects in Europe and to make sure that we have Rosatom kicked out of Hungary, Finland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Bulgaria, chase it out and compensate it. You know, the EIB can take over, or the French can take over, or the Americans can take over, and then also stop buying Russian gas. Of course, we will need in a transition maybe to continue, but logically this can be phased out in the next 5 years, and we buy the gas from Qatar. And the environmental conditions of the gas as it is exploited in Russia, in Siberia, is certainly a full disaster. And one day we will anyhow have to pay for all this when Putin falls, and this will be happening, and then there will be a free democratic Russia, which I hope. Another 90s will be coming, and we will then have to pick up all the bills of all this cheap gas, because we have to build and clean up the disasters of the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation in Siberia. It will be very expensive. So let's really cut the energy consumption and not stay addicted on this dirty carbon which Russia wants to pressure on us. Because the ultimate reason for this escalation is the Nord Stream 2 project. I don't actually think that Russia is fencing too much a big war, because they will certainly lose. Because the more war they make, the more America will defend Ukraine. But what they really want us is European consumers to buy more of the energy and to really continue the great feast they have of this 300 billion of European energy consumer bills. And they want to impose this Nord Stream 2 project on us by physical force. And that's a threat, that's a blackmail, and that we should reject. And that's what I call for. Reject it and make clear that this is not the way we do business. And so we cut off the Russian energy in gas, coal, petrol, and we better use our own resources, and we better use the resources of friendly countries like Australia, Canada, or other countries in the world who have energy, want to sell it. Maybe it's more expensive, but let's better. The worst is always, and the most expensive is always a war. So that's obviously then much better to buy the uranium from Australia, or to buy the coal from Kosovo, or to buy the petrol from Saudi Arabia. It's not that the Russians are the only one with natural resources in the world. They have it abandoned, and they don't use it very well because they don't have the industry to use the energy efficiently, and they don't produce anything but arms. And they are then imposing their kind of wild political and economic model on us by the force of arms. And that's, of course, something I think we should reject. And so since 20 years I'm calling for energy independence of Europe from Russia, but our unfortunately not very capable political class is always addicted to cheap energy, and then of course Russia is paying the kickbacks, and then it seems to be like a good deal for some. And ultimately 20 years later, I started in the European Parliament in 2000. I remember the debates in 2000, 2001, it was all like that, about the situation to really have less dependency. And we have achieved some regulatory progress and some diversification and some infrastructure upgrades. It's not that we have not done anything, or the EU has not done anything. But when you think where we have debated in the EU committees on pipelines and on energy security and independence and in EPP and EDS, and now it's 2022 and Russia is still supplying 80% of the gas to Austria. It's a disaster. Anyhow, I will not give up. Austria join NATO, EU join NATO, and let's be energy independent, and let's integrate Ukraine. If we cannot do NATO as Austria, anyhow, it's complicated. If the Americans don't want NATO membership, of Ukraine at this stage, then let's at least do the EU integration of Ukraine, and let's get the currency back integrated into the Southeastern European cooperation structures, and let's make sure that all these 9 countries will join the European Union. This means also Kosovo, that means Georgia, Moldova, that means Bosnia, one day even Serbia, once they have hopefully said goodbye to Mr. Vucic and joined the West. That would be perfect. We will be a much stronger European Union. We will be much more united with America, and that's very good. And we will have a free trade agreement with America. The EU will join NATO, and the countries of Southeastern Europe, all the Western Balkans, and the free accession trio will be in the European Union and in NATO. And this will make us very successful for the coming future. And that's what I'm devoting the next decade to achieve. Support me and support EU enlargement, NATO enlargement, and stand with Ukraine at this critical juncture, and do what you can to support Ukraine for peace and for Ukraine in the European Union, in NATO, and with the Euro. Bye.